Thank you. I forgot what I got myself into.
Oh, yeah.
My first one. Thank you.
I did get an email that got me very upset, recouping $3,000 from 2022. That I'm gonna have to go and research how. No, I'm gonna have to, yeah, I just got an email. 3,000, like, I'm gonna have to go, like, I have both centers, and I know the child.
Bless you. Bless you.
And go see, where did this come from? Yeah. Because I did keep the child, but I don't know where this $2,932 that I owe is coming from. Because it's like a family of like 4 or 5 kids. Or is it right? Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Because there's a lot of them that transfer and like I get paid at one, but I like in my co-care, I'm like, I got paid at the other here. Yeah. But it is what it is. But 2022. I mean, how far are we gonna keep going back to, I mean, $3,900, I usually just say, take it out of my deposit, well. Yeah. Then that's the only way I learned. Yeah. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll look into it. Yeah, so I called Jonathan, I'm like, I just got an email, and, you know, and she's like, what, he's like, Cindy on the other line, I said, it's just a question. He's like, it's not about Cindy, is it, when we got her, I said, no. That's funny. But when I get back in, I got some other irons to hash out first thing in the morning, that I'll do.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah, don't start spending time on it quite yet. Give it at least a day.
Yeah.
To find
Yeah.
out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Get transferred into the section. It used to be kind of all of them, so. Yes. Actually, the first time I've ever been inside this building.
Really?
Yeah, much less this room.
Hey.
A proxy. Go, Jody.
That's a big difference, New York, though. Battery. Yes. Yeah, I don't think he wants to go to New York, right? And that's good. He's happy with that. Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Did y'all make up for the storm? Did y'all lose any power? Okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Can't complain about that. 3 days. We lost power for 3 days. No damage though, thank God. So I can live with power out, no damage. Yeah, oh, it was bad, very bad. I think we were out of electricity like 10 days, so. Wow. So we'll take this one.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys for attending our September council meeting. On behalf of the Early Childhood Care and Education Advisory Council, I call this meeting to order. And to begin our meeting, I would like to call on Dr. Vicky Silas to call the roll. Dr. Silas, may we have a roll call, please?
Captain Beto,
Here,
Christy Bennett, Maria Blanco, Carmen Brabham, Bridget Bryant, Representative Carver, Dr. De Molinaire, Senator Edmonds, Amy Ewing, Jane Hamilton, Deputy Chief Heinen, Antoinette Ford, Ariel Hughes,
Here.
Representative Hughes, Jody Joseph, Dr. Lucas, Tafta Miller, Amy Moran, Caroline Oglesby, Norma Palmer, Jonathan Pierce,
here.
Dr. Polito, Jen Roberts, Dr. Sonye, Kelly White, Dr. Terrio, David Thibodeau, Kyrie Wahid, Shannon White, Amy Zapata. We have a quorum.
Thank you. And before we move on, I just want to make a note that we are live streaming, so please keep your mics on mute until you choose to speak. So we'll now ask for a motion to approve the July 17th, 2024 minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? So moved. All right, Dr. De Molinaire, and a second. Thank you, Ariel. Second. Any discussion? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion passes. So to begin, may I get a motion to receive the revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulations? Thank you so much, Dr. Saunier, and a second. Thank you, Dr. It's hard, Michelle. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from our members? Any opposition? All right, hearing none, the motion passes. I am going to now transition to Karen Powell, Deputy Assistant Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education, to provide an overview of these revisions.
Thank you, Dr. Polito. So you can see on the screen a summary of the high-level revisions requested, but you also have in your folders the detailed proposed revisions. And so I'll just walk us through them and then take any questions that you have about them. A number of the revisions being proposed today are in response to legislation passed in the 2024 regular legislative session. So there was Act 657 passed regarding the ability to have stock medications, and early learning centers will now be able to keep those stock medications on site, as well as a number of other entities across the state. So you see proposed in section 1515 of Bulletin 137, the replacement of the phrase about auto-injectable epinephrine to include all the stock epinephrine that's included in Act 657. And so you'll see in a little bit when we get down to section 19 that now there are 4 stock medications specified in the legislation: epinephrine, albuterol, naloxone, and glucagon. And so now this is all encompassing of all the stock medications allowed. Then you'll see in section 1721, this council had suggested at our prior meeting that licensed pharmacists also be allowed and approved to administer medication administration training. And in the short turnaround time between that council meeting and our Bessie meeting, we did not get that update entered into the policy. So we're bringing it back now to enter it into the policy based on the council recommendation. You see some cleanup in section 1725. Now that epinephrine is included in the list of the stock medication that is permissible, you'll see that we're moving all the epinephrine information down to section 19 shortly. Then chapter 18 about childcare criminal background checks is really about simplifying and aligning our policy with some information. We've received some updates from the federal government and the FBI. And so there will still be 2 types of CCCBC determinations, but one will be strictly for owners of all types of center. And then the second type of determination will be for all other staff members in center, including owners. And so for owners, there is an additional check that has been in place to make sure that there have been no convictions related to crimes of fraud. In section 1907 and 1909, you see several suggestions related to safe sleep practices. We have unfortunately seen several tragedies in the last year related to safe sleep, and so our licensing team has recommended these changes to further safeguard children. And so you see the suggestion in 1907 that all crib mattresses shall have a fitted sheet while the infant is in the crib to further ensure that there's no loose bedding. And in 1909, we have seen that there's not always a crib available for every individual infant in care. And so trying to clarify that for centers. And then in section 1917, this is the addition of all of the stock emergency medication policy. Now we are continuing to work with LDH on the implementation of this legislation in the state, but this is, we want to make sure that we are not presenting any barriers to these life-saving opportunities being available to centers. And so we want to get this entered into our bulletin promptly. So you can see in 1917 that it allows early learning centers to have stock medications. That needs to be in the name of and for use specifically by the early learning center. It designates what some of those stock medications are. We know that future legislation might add additional medication to this category, or that LDH may add additional medication. It keeps the provision from prior legislation about epinephrine training. It says that early learning center employees must be trained on the use of stock medications in order to be able to administer them. It talks about what that training should include, what content. And then it notes that medication can be administered to a child on the premises who's experiencing a life-threatening medical emergency, as long as there has been written authorization for that child, and as long as the medication is administered in accordance with the protocol and the standing order for the medication. So questions about any of the proposed revisions?
So is LDH, once this goes into effect, how are childcare centers going to be distributed these stock medications that have to be in their names? I mean, what's that going to look like as far as when licensing comes out, when they check for that, what's going to be, how's that going to go if we're able to say?
So there's still a lot being figured out by LDH. They are working to craft those standing orders to begin with. And so I think, this is the first step. The final rule process takes several months. And during that time, we'll be providing in our monthly webinars and in newsletters the guidance that surrounds what we're learning from LDH along the way. They also have to promulgate their own rules related to this, and that also is a multi-month process. So we will update the field as we know more, and those are fantastic questions to start with as we continue to collaborate with LDH and help them consider the questions the field will need answered as well.
And did the legislation have any guidance on how, like, training and those types of things for providers?
So I like right before walk down here, I was like, let me refresh myself on that legislation. There was not specifics. And again, I'll look back on the training itself, and that is what we're going to be working, of course, with LDH on. I do want to follow up to the question. This is the beginning of the rulemaking process on our end. It is still up to the center to a degree if they so choose to have these stock medications. And so we'll be in communication with the field as they make those choices that are best for the site and the center. This is kind of like the step one. I'll look back again at the legislation, but I want to say in our discussions that was not present, and that will be something we're working with LDH on. Later in today's meeting, we are going to be providing an update, a very high level update as it relates to the health and safety training. This is not necessarily connected because this would be different because it would be specific to these medications. But I do want to acknowledge that it's multiple of the similar threads of conversation that this council has had and the feedback that you provided along the way. I just want to acknowledge and say thank you for sharing that. This is the beginning of the rulemaking process. And so your feedback on these bulletin revisions are considered. And our goal is, of course, to begin the process and the journey and ensuring that we're in line with the legislation.
Am I on? Number 5 says at least one employee at each learning center shall receive the training. What if that one staff is not there? So that's something that,
I think it needs to be consistent on whatever policy you write up about the use and administration of the auto-injectable epinephrine specifically. And so 15 would still include you as a private center and business get to determine what your policy is for your center, whether you will carry some of these stock medications, all of them,
or
how
none.
many. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so it's really up to you to write your policy in such a way that it fits what you are willing and able to do. So that part about the at least one, it's just part of the legislation from, I believe, 2022 regarding auto-injectable epinephrine. The statute requires at least one be trained, regardless of whether you decide to keep it in stock and administer it.
No, you feel it. So just a question. This was pretty quick. So first question, did the legislation have a deadline? Did it require a certain timeline?
I do not
There's-
remember a timeline being in the legislation. It doesn't, I would not promise that it wasn't in there, but having reread it multiple times, I don't recall a timeline. I think from the perspective of the department, again, we want to make sure we are working quickly to honor the legislation and make sure that anyone who wants to provide these medications is not being held up and facing
Right.
barriers through the department.
Got it. My next question is, while I do understand that, I'm always thinking about unintended consequences when we add or change regulation. And when I look, I know we've talked about the fitted sheet while the infant is in the crib. Someone mentioned to me on my way here that the elastic on a fitted sheet, fitted sheet had become loose and a child had died because of that. So are there other options for crib, for mattress crib sheets that, I'm thinking a slip zipper cover or something. So if we limit it just to that, I'm sure that there are other safe things out there. And so, currently it says loose, and to me, that encompasses everything, including, this is just, it just seems limited to a fitted sheet. And once I heard that, it just made me start thinking, what else is out there? And again, that was on my way here, and I wasn't gonna Google and drive. So
Well, thank you for remaining safe on the road. I would say, I'm fitted sheet, I think in terms of the goal here is that it is tight. And it is not, I apologize if I was to flip right now to the rest of the bulletin. In terms of safe sleep, it is ensuring that it is not anything loose. That has been, there have been instances of loose. And so I think if the concern is the specificity of it being a fitted sheet, revising the language to have it less specific on it being a fitted sheet, but it's a sheet that's taut or a tight fit. I think that.
are not loose.
We have,
Even if it's a zipper cover, it's not gonna be loose.
different things like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, if the elastic comes loose, we as the child care center or the parent should be replacing that immediately. So that way it doesn't come loose in the crib.
I think if we are to revise language, which I'm not saying opposed to, I think the greater concern is if you have a fitted sheet that is so worn to the degree that it is causing parts of it to be exposed to baby, that the issue would be the cleanliness or the safetiness of that sheet itself. And so I hear what you're saying in terms of your concern if that was the specificity of it being a fitted sheet. I don't think the intention there is that it can only be a fitted sheet, that it could not be a sheet that has a zipper. I wouldn't interpret that as saying it must have an elastic. And so I think, I wonder if the revision here is if we revised it to just ensure something, if the concern is that the language of a fitted sheet, but something to the effect of all sheets should have a taut, I'm live on the spot, not coming up with the best word, but something of that effect. But I
Not
think
loose.
ultimately, well, right now, presently within the bulletin, there is
Yes.
specifics of it of not having loose blankets and things. And we're finding the pattern is that you're having a sheet that's placed, but it's as a result becoming loose. And so really the fitted sheet is really about the safety of ensuring that it is the clarity of a fitted sheet. When we all hear that. We know what that expectation is, but right now we have within bulletin that it's not loose, and we're seeing that there are loose because they are not fitted sheets. They're not properly fitting the crib. And so I wonder if
wouldn't that
that's,
be a citation,
it is, yes,
deficiency?
yes,
And so
yes.
we're just adding, so if, let's say, someone did still have a loose sheet, they would be cited for
For the loose
two
sheet. Yep.
deficiencies instead of just one. But it essentially it's the
I'm
same
looking
thing.
right
So-
behind you at the Division of Licensing, right behind you. So I'm,
Well, with the insurance companies are looking very closely at
Mhm.
deficiency lists, and it's becoming harder and harder to get insurance for providers. And, you know, when you add another deficiency to one instance that, you know, I'm not discounting the danger of having loose bedding. I want to make that very clear. But if, you know, I'm looking at unintended consequences, if we look at the difference in the two, we get cited for two deficiencies for one issue. And so to me, that's a problem, especially when we look at insurance companies looking at a center. So adding this language, to me, and I maybe I'm just missing it. It doesn't clarify anything to me.
I think there's also potentially a cleanliness issue because although there is something that says no loose bedding, there's nothing that specifically says that child shouldn't be directly on the mattress, and that's not really a clean situation. So
Okay,
this does add
so-
something additional as
so-
well.
So I would agree that, yes, we should not put children directly on a mattress because of cleanliness.
that is presently not within the policy as it requiring anything to be on mattress.
So if that was the intent, then perhaps we can be more specific towards that. So a child shall not be placed on a bare mattress.
I think we have a dual intent. I think we want to save infants and ensure the health of them.
Can we take loose bedding out of the deficiency that's above and put the loose bedding with the crib sheet? To where we don't get two deficiencies?
We could potentially do that. That stipulation involves more than just loose bedding. So it also talks
Right.
about stuffed animals, et cetera. So, but yes, we could take that portion of it and combine it here in 3.
That way the loose bedding and the crib sheets all one issue. It's all bedding. So somehow just to where we're not getting two deficiencies, it's just one.
Right. If you don't meet either
A crib
portion of
issue.
it. Yeah.
It's a crib issue. Yeah. Look at that.
There could be multiple crib issues
Yes.
in E, but yes, the bedding could be compartmentalized.
So right now, presently, cribs shall be free of toys and other soft or loose bedding, including comforters, blankets, sheets, bumper pads, pillows, stuffed animals, wedges. So adding language within that section as specified to ensure that crib shall be free of toys and other and include bedding, something of that effect. So essentially taking the language from what we have as a separate item and folding it in within section 2 of the current. So it addresses both issues. It acknowledges that it needs to, but is the concern still over whether it's fitted? And I don't know if there's any other providers that wanted to chime in on the concern over it being fitted. Could we specify that it needs to be fitted within that language and in that sentence?
I think that's fine. I'm not a crib sheet expert.
I am not either, but as a very young mother, I have a high interest in this space. So I have done probably extensive research, and I'm sure Dr. Polito has as well, about the safetiness of sheets, but go for it.
Yeah, I am not the sheet expert, even though 3 children of my own and so forth. But I think, I don't know where it is in Bulletin 137, where we talk about just upkeep in general. And when we think about an elastic coming off of a crib sheet, I mean, clearly that's in disrepair and that needs to be taken care of. I think the fitted sheet, to appease you all, which I echo that sincerely as a provider, those who are not in the minutia of what we deal with, it's very difficult, right? We are getting deficiencies on multiple, for multiple things, maybe not. But what that does is impede our ability to secure insurance as well as partner with organizations or on those social media blasts, right? Oh, did you look at the inspections? So I appreciate this being twofold. I think the goal is it needs to be a fitted sheet. And if we can tie that into the existing regulation where it captures both and we're not being cited for two separate things, it becomes overwhelming when we get there.
So to summarize, I think the language potentially for this same section, E, but in part 2, folding it into present language, it would read, all crib matches shall have a fitted sheet while the infant is in the crib. Crib shall be free of toys and other, and it's building that language into that same section. So if a deficiency was cited for it not having a fitted sheet, or if it was loose, it would all live within that same section. Does that resolve? Okay.
That resolved that one, absolutely. You heard that? So with all that being said, with what just happened, these revisions came to the advisory council today in order to get it through to Bessie by October. So my first question was, did the legislation have a timeline? And we don't know. We don't think it does, but if it doesn't, are we, and I understand what you said, Karen, about getting this out so people can do this, but are we jumping the gun and considering what just happened?
We
or what we just
also have
discussed?
to ensure that the department, nothing happens to a child while waiting for this legislation to be entered into policy. And so we can revise as we do, we can improve on this policy that's proposed as we learn more. But we need to make sure
Through the
that-
rulemaking process though, right? Which is a timely process. So
Is there a section of concern?
I don't know 100%. Our board looked at this yesterday, and there were a lot of questions, and I don't have that list right now. I mean, I can read a lengthy email, but
I mean, we're more than happy to take any of those questions, especially if it's training specific to the question earlier about training, and ensure that our forward-facing communication as it relates to this information addresses some of those questions without knowing the questions may not actually live in bulletin revisions. They may live more so in the communication to the field. And so I think that really is my question. Does the concern lie within the language within the bulletin, or does the concern lie within our communication about the language in the bulletin? And I was asking that of you, so.
very good. I'm thinking. So again, I have not had a chance to, so so I don't have the answer to that question yet, and I guess that's kind of why I'm thinking, should we move this to November for a December Bessie? We've been without this for years, right? And
No, there was no legislation before that.
absolutely. And do we have statistics on, on any of this? And you mentioned, like, yes, we want to save kids, but we also don't want to rush into something that could have some unintended consequences
This
without
would not
having.
be required of any cider center. This would not be, you would not be required to have any of these stock medications. I'm looking.
Correct.
But that's my question for you guys. Have y'all taken into consideration a waiver for this? Because Head Starts, early Head Starts,
It would not
It's
be.
not a
required. It's
requirement.
not a
It's just an
requirement.
allowance.
okay, because we can't do
Yes.
this
No.
without prior permission. We have to have all this
Mhm.
documentation.
It's
So,
all May.
But with that being said, you're saying it's not a requirement. So if they came on license and we don't have this and nobody's trained to do this, we won't be cited for this?
The only thing you are required to do in this section, because of 2022 legislation, is have at least one employee trained in the use of auto-injectable epinephrine. That is a requirement for all centers from the legislature. But the rest of this, you don't have to have epinephrine. You don't have to create a policy to administer it.
And again, that I'm definitely gonna have to have Officer Head Start, because again, we would have to have permission even to do this. So it's like a requirement we're doing in Louisiana that we're never gonna be able to do without permission.
I
So-
understand that. It's, the epinephrine has been in place in Bulletin. It was just in a different section since the 2022 legislation. And only because that was put into state legislation. The rest of this is wholly optional. It's only if you opt into having the stock medication that you then have to meet these requirements.
So have we discussed somebody that wants to do all this? Like, is there somebody that has looked at this and I want this, I'm gonna buy into it, I'm gonna get all these drugs, I'm gonna have them in my center? Have they read over this? Have we had anybody that,
I suspect that there are probably maybe some of your members who have, because CCAL does such a good job of updating on the legislation, but because LDH is still working on the orders to make it available, I think that people have questions that they need answered before making the determination of whether you will choose to do that at your center. And so we're all going to be waiting on that guidance from LDH to help you just make your decisions.
okay, so we can defer this to November?
I think it'll be a decision for the agency.
I think it's helpful to know, I think is the pause in a particular section, or is the pause just the lack of understanding for the communication to the field will help us better determine our next steps? Because I think right now, and I'm pulling up the legislation, Act number 657 of 2024, you know, I without knowing the author's intent and everything behind the legislation itself, we can't speak to the demand simply because this is putting us in the rulemaking process for this particular piece of legislation. And so I think if better knowing concerns of it being the communication or a specific section, because as it stands now, I don't know if we'd have a ton of revisions between now and November to the bulletin itself. It sounds like what would probably behoove us is we would probably come to the November meeting with the next steps as it relates to the communication to the field, letting you give us further feedback of the questions you've received, ensuring that we're folding that in. I think that would be, I think it's my lack of clarity of understanding if it's the bulletin itself or if it's the guidance that needs to go to the field.
But I think that's part of it too. I don't know that we have the answer to that question because this was, right. It's like with legislation, shall may, any little word, comma, things can change the way that it's interpreted by the field, by providers, by the department. And so I would just like to caution we just in this room changed, one thing, and that's just thinking through it today. I don't know what, if any, unintended consequences are out there with this, but I think after maybe a little bit more time to study would be, I think that it would be a smart thing.
Can I make a comment? So, well, just as a provider, I think if anything for this section, I think that's making it more confusing. I think if it could be changed to early learning centers have the option to maintain emergency medication and can administer if needed, I think would help. Because at least, like I said, speaking as a provider, epinephrine would be helpful to have as a stock medication just because, in the summertime, there's wasps, there's different things, and children can have allergic reactions that have never had them prior. I know some centers do not serve peanut products because we know there's a surge in allergies in that sense and just allergies in general for young children nowadays. But I think if it just said, or have the option to have, may be helpful. And then of course, once you all figure out how we distribute that and how that goes, then it's more clear for centers whether it's something we have to do or not. Because like I mentioned, I just wanted to make sure that I'm not gonna receive a deficiency if I don't have the SOC medication. It's okay if I don't have to have it, and that's fine. But I think there just needs to be more clarity in the sense of it is not required for you to have this medication, but if you choose to have it, this is what you have to do. And then one of your employees has to be trained on that administration. But I will say most med admin does train on epinephrine administration in that process, so.
Or maybe may but are not required, just, yeah. Any other comments or questions?
I know, I'm gonna get off the soapbox, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm still back to this. So where is it's saying that the parents give you permission to even give your children this? Like, is this gonna be somewhere in here that says they gotta give you permission?
Number
Do they?
8, under 1917.
So
Early
me-
learning centers can administer to a child who has received written authorization.
So as a parent, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna check off and sign off for you to give this to my child just in case. And I don't know if they're allergic to it or not, our age group. This is what we're saying, right? Okay.
You
I
you will
just-
add it to your policies of what when your parents tell you what other medications can or cannot be administered.
But just as a note, on our MasterCard application that licensing has on the website that everyone has to use, on the bottom of that, it does notate, this authorizes the center give my child emergency medical care if needed. So I think the gist of this is that if there's an emergency, it's not
Right.
that, I mean, let's be realistic. As a parent, I have a 3-year-old as well. If she had an allergic reaction of some sort, I mean, even if we call 911, if it is anaphylaxis, that we know that your life can end very quickly. So it's more so, at least from what my understanding is if that type of scenario happens, it's not for an everyday, a child has asthma problems or already has an EpiPen or something like that. It's for those, at least what I'm understanding is
Yes.
extreme life-threatening situations that you have to make a decision that, can be life or death. We can wait for 911. Of course, you're still going to do all your regular protocol, but it does note that in our, on the MasterCard. I just looked at it yesterday with someone.
My only concern is we're telling childcare providers to be a doctor and say, this is what the child needs and do this. Protocol now says call 911. 911 would tell you if you have any of these things to be able to do it. This is not what this is saying to me. It's telling me that if I think a child is having an allergic reaction, I can do this. This is what this is telling me. And I'm just being honest with y'all. This is what this
If
says.
you have the training, and the
And we got
training
it.
includes how to recognize the signs of the life-threatening emergency and how to take the next steps after.
But we're asking childcare providers to do this.
And we are not asking childcare providers to do it. The legislature provided the opportunity for childcare providers who want the ability to get these prescriptions, because our understanding is in the past, there have been centers. I cannot tell you their names because I don't recall to have to, but there have been childcare centers who have said, I would like to keep epinephrine on site, not just for those children who have a known allergy and their parents might bring it, but for the emergencies and the unexpected that might occur. And prior to that earlier legislation and now this legislation, there was no mechanism for centers to be able to do it. And so there was pressure by some members of the public for the legislature to give centers the ability to opt into this. And that's where the legislation stems from. But it was not something that was requested by the department. But now that it is law, we do have to address it and permit it.
I would just say from representing the pediatricians in the community and representing the American Academy of Pediatrics that both of these pieces are good. They're a step in the right direction, so there's probably work to be done about the logistics of it. But the fitted sheet language, whether you just say not loose or just say, you could use other language, but fitted sheet has been included on some AAPA documents, so I think that's fine. As far as the use of epinephrine, there are recommendations from our Allergy Society that say there's really not a big downside to giving it, and that most people could probably recognize when it's needed in the lay community as Narcan for sure, no downside. If you could have got a kid down, you think there's an ingestion, there's no downside to giving it. So I'm sure that the childcare providers would need some training, but it's not dangerous to give these when your gut feeling is that this child's having an allergic reaction. And that's so there's supporting professional recommendations for it to lean on. Now, glucagon, maybe those types of things, there's, I don't think there's a downside, but, asking someone to recognize hypoglycemia might be a little trickier. But epinephrine, I think this is a move in the right direction. It saves lives.
And we do know, we can share with you that, and this would all be part of the guidance and, become part of the trainings, that LDH is planning to write standing orders that explain, what these signs look like, that tell you exactly how to administer these stock prescriptions.
And so but that's not out yet.
They are developing that as quickly as possible also because they know this needs to move forward.
And I think that would be something, I don't know if we would have to be of close communication with LDH before November, but this is something that we would be happy to update you on in that space. What does that standing order look like? What is the communication? This is kind of the beginning step, and then we can provide in November, if we're able to move forward, standing order information that's available, next steps as it relates to training, and then of course communication to the field, because by the time we come back together in November, it will be still in the very early rulemaking process changes. It will have at that point potentially been brought forward to Bessie if this body allows us to move forward, but we could further provide an update, just like what we're going to do about the health and safety trainer later in today's meeting, about the communication to the field, the standing orders from LDH, but again, emphasizing that this is a may, this is an allowance, this is not a requirement.
While y'all are developing the new online trainings, will we have specific trainings to this? Like if I wanted to just click a video for 30 minutes of this, can y'all just kind of
And that's what we are
Working
working towards determining, but I mean, that would be a goal. We want to make this training just as accessible and easy to access. I just repeated myself. We want to make it as accessible as possible for the centers who opt in. And so we just have to keep making sure we are consulting with legal, LDH, and that our plans for moving forward align with the legislation, but that is our intent.
Yeah, I just don't want a 3-hour health and safety course and like 2 hours and 20 minutes is epinephrine, So if we could just have like shorter,
No,
to the point
absolutely.
videos to go
Yes.
specifically to different things, which I think I told y'all that before, to have 10 1 hours
Yes.
to focus on different things.
So again, I do agree with the idea that emergency medication, and I agree with that idea and concept. I just want to make sure that when we revise the bulletin, that and I'm not just thinking about this piece. I'm just thinking I'm still going through my mind about the age range and because that was a concern as well.
That is, we haven't gotten to that section, Jonathan, but I think we could go to that place. The last section of this revision is specific to Chapter 21, Minimum Transportation Requirements and Standards. Adding age range, whenever children are transported in a vehicle, we require their names to be provided. And so some feedback that was shared with us by CCAL was specific. Originally, we were asking for the name of, the age of each child, but there was some feedback as it relates to that being an additional step. And so we added age range. So it would be still requiring the form at which sites list the name of the children that are being transported in a field trip, adding potentially a column or a checkbox or a section at the top of that page that tells you the age ranges of the children in the vehicle, and not asking them to require all ages of every single child, but what are the age ranges? And then that will help us better know what is the ratio of adult to child ratio that should be on that vehicle. And so that is the last one we had. I don't think we had voiced over.
No,
that
my
particular
apologies
thing.
that I missed that one on the page. Yes.
And so that, again, I do appreciate, but I don't know that I've had enough time, or, that this group has had enough time to really think about what does that mean? I can write down any rate. I can write down these children are between 3 and 15.
Would you have 3 and 15-year-olds in the same vehicle? Yeah, and I think that's really the information that we want to know, right? Is what is the age range of the children in the vehicle? In an ideal world, are you transporting 3 to 15-year-olds on a regular, or is it more a specific age range?
Okay, so, and the purpose is just to make sure that the center's
Mhm.
at ratio on
Mhm.
field trips.
Mhm.
But there's a way to figure that out right now. And again, I'm not totally opposed to it. Obviously, we've discussed this, but I don't, there's still thoughts going through, and I don't know that we've reached out to some of the other larger providers nor have we had time to, some of the other larger providers that do field trips.
I think we were hoping that this would be just kind of adding an information to an existing form. I think ultimately, we're hoping it's not a burden that's outside of just, if it is truly you're on a bus and you've got 3 to 15-year-olds, add that information.
Because the ratio would be with whatever this for the youngest child. So this wouldn't be like putting an age range is not a hindrance.
Correct.
Right.
And really the age range I'm hoping that envisioning, I'm looking directly at Andrea Burrell behind Director of Licensing, that exercise would take less than 5 minutes. I'm thinking, I hope you would know all the age range. So that the ratio for that 3-year-old, it's just giving us that up-to-date information, updating your record of however you communicate field trip or transportation.
And when I look back or when I think back to just the discussion, I'm thinking deficiencies. This adds another opportunity for a deficiency. If I write down 6 to 15 or 6 to 14 or whatever it is, and I just so happen to have a 5-year-old on the bus, then that's another opportunity for a deficiency.
But you
And
would want to ensure that you do know your children's ages and you do have the safe ratio for them.
right. But we would.
But if you have the safe ratio, then you know what their ages are. I've got an age range of this and.
Should be like, you're already filling out the form with their name, add a space with an age range.
Yes. Okay. So perfect. I still may have questions about this app once we look into it some more. And so I think that's kind of another reason why we're talking through this and maybe suggesting that we move this to November, or, if there's something really pressing then maybe we can pick and choose as a group what to add and what to hold off on.
I welcome, Jonathan, I've heard from you. I welcome other council members' thoughts in that approach in terms of what I'm hearing is I think we've addressed in terms of the fitted sheet, revision in that space. I've heard feedback. I think the question is, and I've heard from you, Jonathan, but I'm gonna ask for the other council specifically with the medication administration training. I think we can say we will bring in November additional information as it relates to the guidance. I think where clarity is needed, if there is concern with the specific language within the bulletin, what is that concern so we can address it? And if it is not something that we can address today, I think it's clarity of whether it's bulletin language or guidance language. So I want to pause there, hear from other members of the council as it relates to the medication administration section, so we can know if this is the section that we want to pause on or defer, but move forward if other members of the council feel comfortable.
I think the question is, when will this bulletin go into effect where childcare centers have to follow these regulations? I think that's really the crux of the concern is that not that these are, you know, maybe not needing to hold off, but just when do childcare providers have to follow this guidance? And then whenever that happens, if it is indeed November, that this will then be put out for all childcare facilities to have to follow, what will happen before that to make sure we have what
It
we
would
need?
not be that early, so thank you for
So-
asking that.
So I'm
Yes,
like
there's-
staring at Nikki Landry, who
Yes.
can be our rulemaking process.
Looking
So-
up the calendar.
So nothing is more exciting to me than rulemaking processes. And so I'm excited to share with you a Cliff Notes version of that. Nikki was much more of an expert, but it sounds from her expressions that the earliest this would be in effect, if we endorse today, bring to Bessie and if approved in October, the earliest that this would be, if all of those things, is February of 2025. So we have essentially between now, we can come back in November with information on the guidance. I think we could even come back again all before any of these rules are in effect in February of 2025. Thank you for that question and clarity. I think the roadmap of a rulemaking process is, if you really want to dive in.
Nikki's your girl. Okay, very robust discussion and we appreciate that. Before we motion to endorse the revisions to Bulletin 137, are there any public comments? Okay, all right. Thank you, Karen. May I get a motion to endorse the revisions to Bulletin 137, Louisiana Early Learning Center licensing regulations with the intent to everything Melinda said? I don't know if that's. Safe sleep section will be addressed and the guidance from LDH on additional guidance on the medication will be brought to future meetings. Okay. Would you all feel more comfortable with roll call or? Okay, so can I get a motion to endorse? Thank you, Dr. Sonier, and a second. Okay, thank you, Dr. Terrio. Okay. Any questions or comments? Mr. Pierce?
Can I throw a substitute motion out there?
Yes, you can. We need a
Okay.
second.
Yes, is now the time to do that, the appropriate time? I would like to make a substitute motion to move this to the November advisory council meeting once we've had time to really dive in and look at these changes.
Okay, do we have a second motion to move the endorsements to this revision to the November meeting? Okay, second by Tafta. All right, any questions or comments regarding the motion to move the revisions to the November meeting? Any opposition to this motion? Okay, hearing none. The motion to move the endorsements of the revision to Bulletin 137 to November passes.
So that would essentially, it would not move it to endorse in November. It's just moving this item to November if there are no objections. If that's, so there, we would be bringing this again in November for an endorsement.
And I guess then the plan is to understand the plan to get the feedback so that when we come back in November, that people would be comfortable to move forward.
So I want to be crystal clear on the motion. The motion is that we are going to bring this again to you in November. And then you will motion to approve. Right now you have asked us to bring this again in November.
And then I think I heard Dr. Sonia say, what is that plan between now and November? So we have heard from the field, we've gathered all the information. Go ahead, Kari.
We can do a roll call if you wanted to do a. Sure. So the motion that is on the floor is presently, and maybe I should be looking at Dr. Silas in this. The motion that's on the floor right now is for us to move this to November. The same exact item of Bulletin 137 to November. And you are requesting a roll call of support. So either a yes, move this to November, or no, do not move this to November, which my assumption is if no, you're wanting to vote on it today in terms of the endorsement. And so if we could do a correct, yes. And so if Dr. Silas is amenable and available, we will go through and do a roll call on that particular motion. If that is the request I am understanding correctly of Mr. Wahid. Okay. All right. So Dr. Silas.
Dr. Silas will do a roll call on the motion to move the endorsements to November.
Yes.
Christy Bennett. Ria Blanco. Carmen Brevin. Dr. De Molinier. Senator Edmonds. Amy Ewing. Yes. Wayne Hamilton.
Dr. Silas, one moment. When we say yes, we are endorsing, just to be clear, to move this to November. Thank you for the clarification. And if you are a proxy, please note you're not able to vote. Okay.
Ariel Hughes. Yeah. Jody Joseph. Dr. Lucas. Tafta Miller. Caroline Oglesby. Norma Palmer. Jonathan Pierce.
Yes.
No.
Roberts. Dr. Sonye. Dr. Terrio. Kari Wahid. Shannon White. We have 6 noes, so therefore it passes.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion passes, so we will move to bring the endorsements to the revisions to Bulletin 137 in November. And that's the recommendation of the council. And Ms. Powell and Malin Baker will work on gathering information before our November meeting. So we're clear for that. Okay. The next 2 items are informational. The first is a presentation by the Department on Early Childhood Language and Literacy. And to introduce this item, I'd like to transition to Malin.
Thank you. It is very critical, and I'm going to put eyes on Mr. Pierce that if we get that information in your feedback, because as it stands right now, I don't have any edits for one of those sections. And so we want to bring forward, I know the notes of guidance that we can bring, don't know the notes of bulletin revisions that we can bring. But with that said, one of the things that's great about the work of this council is we bring forward, we get your feedback on bulletin revisions, but we also have the opportunity and space to bring forward informational updates. And so the next 2 updates are not for endorsement in terms of a motion per se, but they are a chance for you. Every person that sits at this table has a different lens to the early childhood space. And so we wanted to provide, as y'all can recall from the last meeting, thank you to our members who are here that participated in a panel. We talked about a specific lens, thinking about pathways, workforce pathways, at our last meeting through a panel. Today, we wanted to talk about some of our work specifically as it relates to language and literacy. And so really just wanted to talk to you today about some of the work that's underway within our office. And I think there were some questions, I think maybe Dr. Sonia, you may have asked at some previous meetings of what are some of those focus priority areas of the agency, in particular with the Office of Early Childhood. And I am so grateful to be the newest member of the team and the newest member at this table from the perspective and lens of getting to support the staff, but then also getting to talk to so many of you and different providers in the field. And so one of the things that has been underway over the last few months has been within the agency, and some of you may have heard Superintendent Brumley kind of speak to the department's goals for 2024 and 2028. And really, I'm going to voice over some of the things that you've heard him say as the educational priorities for the agency, which includes the first one being early childhood experiences leading to kindergarten readiness. And happy to go into those other educational priorities that are outside of the scope of early childhood, but just acknowledging that that is an agency educational priority. And so from there, we have been behind the scenes working to think about goals in that space to support in experiences leading to kindergarten readiness. And so with that, we're going to talk today about one lens and one view within our goals. We'll be bringing forward more of this information to October, Bessie, in terms of those key endeavors. But to begin, I wanted to share with you our key performance indicator for the Office of Early Childhood is for us to grow by 5 percentage points the number of sites that are high proficient and excellent. And so I definitely do not want to underscore, there has been so much excellent work in terms of the growth of the quality of our sites. And so previously, a lot of the goals have been really anchored around the number of sites at proficient. And that is now in the 90% range, which if you were to pause and I think I've seen the data of the growth over time, it definitely acknowledge a tremendous round of applause in terms of that growth. But one of the things that we're looking at now is that next horizon, moving the focus, of course, continuing to stay at that proficient level, but looking at increasing the number of high proficient and excellent. And so right now we're around 66% of our centers at high proficient or excellent, and we're looking to grow that by 5%. So we're hoping within the coming years to be looking at around the 70% range, of course, continuing to zoom in on increasing that quality. And so with that, we've created several sub goals of things we think could help drive that increase in quality. One of them today, we're going to talk about just one, but I don't want to say that we're zooming in, we're lasering in on one topic. I'm not to say that other factors like creating a safe and nurturing environment is not as important. So we're zooming in on a topic today, acknowledging that other factors go into obtaining any of these goals. And so with that said, one of those goals, the key endeavor, what we're calling it, is on the slide here, which is our goal on increasing language development for children ages birth to 4 at early childhood sites by providing targeted regional and statewide professional development opportunities. And so really thankful for your feedback and the lens that you bring to this space, because we wanted to kind of give you our planning process. We are still, we acknowledge that there is work underway, and there are things that we can continue to do and amplify and work with regions shoulder to shoulder in this space. But wanted to share you kind of the state of our plans at this time, get your feedback. And then we're also going to be bringing this information to the Literacy Commission later this month. And so we are kind of using spaces like this to let you know that we are focusing on these efforts, and we do have some planning underway. And so with that, I am going to transition to Amy Poirier, our Executive Director of Early Childhood Strategy, to kind of give you more information about this priority area for our office. So with that, I will transition now to Amy.
All right, thanks so much, Malin. Very excited to speak with you today about the importance of early language and literacy development in the early childhood space. It is, as with all things early care and education, one of my passions, but one of my top passions. So excited to share about that with you. So we'll talk a little bit just to get everyone in the same frame of mind about the importance of language and literacy specifically in this space. I know Malin mentioned, and that we all agree, that there are all things that add to this, that the safe, nurturing foundation has to be there. And there's many other elements that we do and do well in early care and education that have a long lasting impact for children, both in school and in life, but honing in some on the research surrounding early language and literacy, and then how we plan to implement what we know into providing professional learning and supports to the field, and ultimately impacting child outcomes, children, families, and providers. So we do know that early education plays such a crucial role in the development of language and literacy. I'm sure many of you hear that on and on, especially as we've really focused on that in Louisiana. There are, I'm excited to say, multiple studies that show long-term associations between children's early language and literacy skills and their success in elementary school and beyond. When I started in this field, we had a dearth of information and research in this area, and it has really grown leaps and bounds. We're continuing to learn how much of an impact talking with, reading with, singing with, exposing children to print and phonemic awareness really makes an impact on all they do, and really affects those reading abilities in elementary school. So I could have probably presented to you 2 or 3 hours on all the intricacies of this. So I picked out just a few high points that are very multi-layered. So if there's anything, you identify, hey, we didn't talk about this, please feel free. This is an open space to share. But I did boil it down to 4 key components here. All of these, again, are multi-layered. We know that oral language is the foundation for literacy development. If you do not hear a word, you cannot learn a word. So much of what we do in early care and education is talking with and to and together along with children before they are able to read. So a large part of our work is oral language development. So a lot of times when we hear we're focusing on literacy, it's important for us to realize that role of both expressive and receptive oral language. We also know that this oral language exposure prepares children for things that you hear in that science of reading space, but that awareness to sounds that eventually leads to phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, phonics, and those things where children can identify letter sounds, utilize alphabet knowledge, and then read successfully later on. Another thing we don't talk about too much in the early language space, but we talk a lot about in the early care and education space, is the impact of the knowledge of the world around you. And now that really greatly influences your ability to learn, grow, and at the end of the day, comprehend. If it's something you already know about, have experience with, you can talk about it more, you can learn about it, you have that shared view. So I know all of us being early care and education individuals in the room or supporting of that work, we know the importance of things like concept development, like we talk about with the class instrument, and really going back and forth with quality of feedback and engaging in conversations that increase children's knowledge of the world and also give them the opportunity to share that knowledge and thinking with us. So I really wanted to highlight that, and that's why I, chose these 4, is because we provide so much that really builds that concept of the world that children actually do use in their ability to read, write, speak, and talk. Another thing that is very much impactful is just children's experiences with books and print. I'm sure all of us have heard over and over again the importance of reading with and to young children. That greatly affects their ability to comprehend what they read and to read later on. Actually, of these things, and as we look deeper at the research, the 2 things that are most predictive in the research we have currently are exposure to phonological awareness leading to phonemic awareness, and shared book reading have the biggest impacts as far as what we can do pedagogically and with children's experiences. Not that all the other things I'm about to mention don't fall into that, but they show the greatest return from what we do in early childhood. So if we go on, we have a little bit of our current language and literacy data for the state. And our data show that there is an increased focus, the need for an increased focus on language and literacy specifically. Our current quality data show we're doing a great job, almost largely very high proficient to excellent on some of those things like positive climate, classroom organization, really working with infants, toddlers, and preschools to set a safe learning environment, safe and nurturing learning environment. But when it comes to some of those skills related to development in the areas of language literacy and increasing knowledge, that's where we still need some growth, and our data show that as well. So we've made great strides. As Melinda said, we see sites that we're now looking at high proficient and excellent, but there's still room to grow. And we see this in teaching strategies goal checkpoint data, showing that less than 20%, really only 17.6% of community networks have children who are meeting expectations in the early language and literacy space. So we have room to grow there. We also, our class quality data shows that the scores for language modeling in that dimension largely fall within approaching proficient across age ranges. So where we're doing well in being nurturing and caring for children, we need to talk more. We need to engage them in learning. And then I think this last bullet everyone has seen in multiple meetings. I know I have, but I would be remiss if I did not include it. So 2022, 2023 third grade literacy data show that 43% of students are at mastery. And we know those data are getting better, and we have had initiatives at the department through our partners like our child care resource and referral agencies, and even our partners in the K-12 literacy space here at the department. But we really want to target those in child care sites for our child care providers, and focused on how we can help children talk, share, learn, and grow. So in order to do that, we're coming to you today to talk about launching early language and emergent literacy initiative, really focused on providing professional learning to classrooms in all of the early childhood spaces. So this opportunity will really be focused on the knowledge, skills, and experiences of early childhood professionals, enabling them to provide high quality interactions, experience, and activities that facilitate children's language and literacy development. Really providing them with those foundational literacy skills and language skills for them to be successful readers and writers. So as we mentioned, we like to hear your feedback, and I want to go in a little bit further into details of it, but wanted to pause to give the group an opportunity to share any comments or feedback thus far related to either your experiences with language and literacy initiatives, what you see in your sites, your networks, the communities you serve, and any feedback here.
So on my way down here, I was really ranting and struggling with new teachers in our facilities and we're September assessments. And I'm just going to say that my area, we are struggling to get coached. And we've requested and requested and requested, and one had an assessment today. She's a new teacher, and one's next week, and there's a new teacher, got a mock observation, and they left out of the classroom because it was so bad. And she has assessment next week. I'm struggling, and I just messaged CCAL's group. Is there a boot camp for this? So like, I want to know what the time frame of getting this out there, because I would say my area is one of the top networks. It's my first year of completion at my second center. I have 3 stars, but my new teacher with a bachelor's degree does not have a clue. And I'm struggling. So my goal, and I told Karen a while ago, this is on my top priority in the morning, is to figure out how to get these teachers boot camped on class to have a September assessment. If my teacher scores a 1 or 2 with a bachelor's degree, we got a big problem. And so I'm excited about this, but I think it goes beyond, like, I love this, but our networks are not pulling the weight for us. Like, I can't go into the classroom and do class observation. I'm not qualified. I don't know I don't know where else to pull from. But I'm excited about this because it's like, can we focus on this for this much time and get them here? And then let's go to positive, negative, like quality of feedback. And like, where's the boot camp to get our teachers up to, because they can have a bachelor's degree, don't know anything about class. And we don't know it until they're scored. But how do you get them scored when they coaches and the networks can't come out to you? That's what I'm seeing.
So, we have several other initiatives that we have within our set of sub priorities. And I think it's probably okay for me to lean into this as well. We are considering at the same time, and I'm going to talk about some of the implementation plans or what we're considering through this, that we are considering for other areas, exactly what you're talking about, Tafta. What is it that new teachers need to be successful as well? Because we know from some of our work we did with stimulus funding and looking at workforce through our workforce planning grants that we've talked to groups about, I think even, the councils and commissions, showing that there are so many new teachers. And we know that we have an undereducated, underprepared field right now. And that's something that we deal with as a field all the time. So we are looking at, in not only implementing the language literacy piece that's data driven here, this is one area of the need, what are the other areas of need? So some of the things we are looking at are those things specific to what new teachers need. So is it a combination of, because when you talk with children, lots can happen. This is how we talk with children. This is some positive guidance, behavior guidance classroom, like you said, a boot camp or a crash course, what you need to know and be able to do to be a successful early care and education provider. What kind of environments do you need to provide? So going back, and one thing the strategy team is doing is looking at those foundational things from like your CDA or your National National Association for Professional Recognition, and really looking at how to provide that. And we're also exploring at the same time how to do that in the current system we have, where we need more coaches, we need more support. There's not enough of us to go around. So what kind of mechanisms can we create to ensure that we're having focus, where training is available and there's more opportunities for coaching to come out? So it's there, we're exploring it while we also explore ways to fund that and to make that happen. So I appreciate you sharing that as well.
Do you think that a space as well for our new teachers that they've never set up an environment, and so how do we potentially support them through some of the environmental rating scales? Because we know that there are crosswalks between the environmental rating scales and class to have a more holistic view of what a classroom looks like.
Yes. So we actually, based on some of what we're hearing from the field, and actually in these meetings when we had our early childhood conference in Shreveport, and we'll have it again in Baton Rouge, those were some of our focuses as important. Appropriate early childhood environments for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So that will be something we continue to focus on as well. What the strategy team is hoping to do as we launch these initiatives is look at it from all of those facets, whether it be the facet of a beginning to seasoned teacher and what it looks like for those individuals, to what this looks like in the environment, what this looks like in pedagogy, what this looks like through curriculum usage, and even eventually assessment and individual child goals. No, those are very ambitious things, I know that I'm saying, and we'll take time in how to bring those together and make sure. We know that it's not going to be a one size fit all. So how can we now focus on training and support and professional development in a way that meets where we are as a field, where the data shows us, and best practice at the same time?
Part of this is my jam, so let me be honest about that. But to Tafta's point, with a bachelor's level teacher, it depends how they were trained. And so you might not get scope and sequence and nuance of language literacy development in a certain type of program. Like, I mean, it is so nuanced. So like, I think it's something like as most of us would think is like, everybody needs it. Like, I mean, if I walked up to a teacher today, how many could I walk up to and say, okay, what are the first sounds of language? It's a struggle for people, and it's just because they haven't been exposed.
I mean, for those of you who, and I know some of you do know me and know my background, why I know this is because I have a speech language background as well as an early childhood background. So, you know, I just put that out there that we know it is not something that's taught or focused on. And that's why I agree with Dr. Sonia. We need to look at what this looks like and design professional development experiences that meet teachers where they are, but provide them that foundational knowledge at the same time, because there's so much we could be doing. Thank you for that feedback. Any other just overall feedback about early language and literacy in the early childhood space? All right. So we put together a few slides of what this is beginning to formulate and look like in our initial plans as far as implementation and where we're thinking of going. I know, Tafta, I didn't address what you said. You said something about timeline too. We're looking right now, we're mapping that out, seeing what can be done. Of course, things are related to capacity, who can do this work, who's best suited, funding and such, but hoping to do something this year. So as far as what this looks like, so if we're talking about that, we really want to look at and utilize our current professional learning partnerships. So we have great partners in the field, and we want to utilize those, whether that be individuals or entities like our R&Rs, our community networks, individual early childhood experts within our state, but really looking at early childhood developmental experts to support providers to develop professional learning modules with aligned in-class coaching and applied practice opportunities. So really exploring who is the best fit to provide this training and support to teachers and who has the capacity to do so. I will say it's also recognizing that we will have to train and support in this space too, as the department, to possibly build up individuals who can provide these services as well. We really are focusing on not only the training, but really that in-class coaching piece. What happens when you get into that classroom as a new teacher, and how do you do it? And how do you do that successfully and get support in doing so? And also giving the teachers opportunities to practice those skills and get feedback from a more knowledgeable other. We really want to I kind of got ahead of myself, utilize those partners such as CCR&Rs or Child Care Resource and Referrals and Community Network lead agencies to provide this coaching and facilitate applied practice opportunities at publicly funded sites. But still exploring what partners out there, what the right fit is for the community and the community's needs in these areas. We also want to make sure we don't leave those out that are most impacted in their own professional growth, which is our early childhood directors and teachers, ensuring that they're there to actively partner, be supported, and have an active role in these professional development opportunities so they can implement early language and literacy practices, have the buy-in and the success to sustain it beyond the participation in the initiative and doing this throughout the state. We are really careful to add the directors in here, as we know directors are the gatekeepers to quality and what they consider as important as far as pedagogy, quality, any type of support needs to be there too. So having a site focus as well, when some of our focuses and before have been also more classroom. So how do we get everyone on board? So we're looking to partner with those already doing the great work and helping them to do it better. So the next slide really focuses on the key components. If you've worked, lived, read anything in the early childhood or any language and literacy space, you probably know there's about 100 ways that we could have bulleted this out based on research, and these are also multifaceted. But some of the key components we'll look at is oral language development. So that has things like expressive, receptive, vocabulary, comprehension, everything in there, just speaking with children as part of their regular development, talking with them regularly, singing, playing. shared book reading, as I mentioned before, and the impact on that. How not just only to read with children, but read with children in a way that engages them and actually facilitates language and literacy. We'll have focuses on print and print awareness, phonological awareness, which includes things like the umbrella over phoneme awareness, and eventually phonics. You can't have phonics without alphabet knowledge, and also a focus on emergent writing. With all this said, I'm not saying that babies are going to learn the alphabet, but at the same time, this would be scaled in a scope and sequence that is appropriate for development. So I think one of the things we really want to consider as I wrap up my discussion on that and open it back to you is just what we're thinking of anticipated outcomes. What I'm sharing today, or what we're sharing today, is very, very broad, and we'll continue to tighten this up with looking at the data and as we have specific elements that we're doing in this work as we further design it and then go towards implementation. But early on, our anticipated let's see if it's a test.
We'll wait and see if it's a test.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? An emergency situation has been reported in the building. Please exit the building immediately. Walk quickly, do not run. Do not use the elevator.
We're going to go to the front of the building. We don't know how long this will last, but I safely ask you, take your belongings. We're going to go to the front of the building. And happy to stay as a group. Don't know how long this will last.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We are going to pause our live stream due to an evacuation.